When you think of Psychonauts, you may envision large areas with quirky enemies, difficult platforming feats, and special abilities. Psychonauts 2 is full of brilliantly designed levels that make smart use of all of these features. But Compton's Cookoff, the second full brain world in Psychonauts 2, is unlike anything that has preceded it.
Oh, you think the human mind is safe? Well, that's cute.
Both within the game itself and platformers in general. It trades Psychonauts' signature sprawling psychedelic design for a forensic attention to detail, while traces of the brain owner's intense psychological conflict shape almost every aspect of the stage. Psychonauts 2 has no shortage of levels built around addressing key issues, but Compton's Cookoff stands out as an expertly realised exercise in combining unique gameplay with thoughtful, thematic storytelling. Even if some of it happened by accident. To find out more about how it came together, and the changes it underwent during development, IGN picked the brains of members of the Double Fine development team to break down how such a hearty, memorable meal of a level came to life. This is Art of the Level.
It's
Time
for...
Ram it down!
Compton's Cookoff central stage is an actualization of Compton Bull's anguished mental state. A founding member of the Psychonauts, Compton was hailed as a hero for his part in ending the Grulovian War, but he always felt undeserving of the praise. After his partner Cassiopeia leaves to sort out an identity crisis, Compton retreats to a small chamber where he lives quietly, safe from the threat of other people. However, a jar of bees and a few mishaps later, and Compton is on the verge of a mental overload with potentially disastrous consequences.
I can't take it! I can't!
Prompting Psychonauts protagonist Raz to enter Compton's brain and resolve the problem. What starts as a straightforward battle against a powerful judge turns into something much more fearful for Compton. A timed trial where his peers judge his worth.
Anything but this.
The trial is a cooking show, where Compton and Raz must prepare meals sourced from the audience and are praised by puppet versions of Hollis, Ford and Otto.
Good evening, and welcome to Ramadan.
As is often the case in level design, Compton's Cookoff began life as something completely different from the final product. Development had already begun on other brains, Psychonauts 2's levels, and the team only had a broad outline of what they wanted for Compton's stage. Lead artist Emily Johnstone and level designer Asif Siddiqui said the goal was always to focus on Compton's insecurities and fears of judgment.
The theme largely stayed the same for presenting Compton's anxiety as this series of tasks he had to perform in front of a panel of judges. I think that was always the main through line. Because that's sort of consistent with his feelings of shame and inferiority, in relation to the other people running the Psychonauts.
At the very, very beginning, we were trying to lean a little bit on the toy box element. A lot of the accoutrements around were blocks and a literal playground, because Compton's kind of stunted in growth because he's sort of locked himself away in this chamber so he can protect himself from the world. So we wanted to lean into a little bit of that, I'm still a little bit of a child and I'm playing with puppets, quite literally.
Well, here we are, at the moment of truth.
Johnstone said the goat puppets were a constant throughout the design process. While the goats represent the Psychonauts members Compton felt the most inferior to, Johnstone and Double Fine founder Tim Schafer wanted to illustrate the dark self-judgment from Compton himself, and juxtapose it against the childlike setting that remains central to the level's design throughout the different forms the stage took during development. Central to those changes was Siddiqui himself, and a prototype for a different game he had developed several months before, after he had been invited to lead one of the studio's Amnesia Fortnite sessions, where anyone can pitch a game or level idea that may get picked up later. Siddiqui had proposed a game called The Gods Must Be Hungry, a competitive cooking game that pits human chefs against ravenous gods, in what he described as Burger Time meets Attack on Titan in a Japanese cooking show. Players raced against the gods to reach the cooking arena first, where they navigated lava pits and deadly obstacles to prepare ingredients at massive cooking stations. After grabbing food items, they would hop on grind rails to reach the prep areas and feed the gods their completed meals, putting them into an eternal food coma and saving the world from divine wrath. It was a popular idea at the time, but sat unused until Psychonauts 2 project lead Zach McClendon suggested using it as the basis for one of the sequel's brain levels. The idea of a cooking show became the new focal point for Compton's brain.
What do you have to say for yourself?
Rather than playing in a toy kitchen, Compton performs in a competition with Raz's help. Raz chops, boils, and blends audience members into meals at deadly cooking stations.
We're old friends. He boiled my dad and grandfather.
Using rails, the power of mental connections, and his other psychic abilities to navigate the show floor and complete each challenge for Compton's judges before the buzzer sounds.
Lumber stack! Lumber stack!
In order to design the stage's overall look, Johnstone, Siddiqui, and the design team originally looked closely at the original Iron Chef.
Double Fine loves the 60s and 70s. Just generally. Psychonauts technically it takes place in an 80s realm because there's like no cell phones, no internet technology. There is, but it's a little bit like... And so we had to do something earlier. All of our characters are older people, so we had to sort of take, like, if this takes place in the 80s, then we have to go back in time. When was their sort of heyday?
And, you know, it sort of like underscores like Compton's age as well, since he is an older character and probably would have consumed, you know, more television from that era growing up.
Johnstone settled on The Price is Right for the stage's centerpiece, and said she watched dozens of episodes from the 60s and 70s to get the feel just right.
It's
Time
for...
Ram it down!
You know, just all those little details of that little microphone, that little like, hello! And kind of that CRT feeling where it's like a little bit bubbled and curved, and on screen there's all these terrible graphics that are like just so like 60s and 70s with the lights, and as much of that stuff as we could incorporate.
The team looked elsewhere for additional game show inspiration. Johnstone said Double Dare, the 1980s trivia show built around completing messy challenges, helped them embrace the idea of messiness and grossness.
Moderately pleasant.
At one point earlier in production, when the team was throwing out ideas to see what might fit, environment lead Jeff Solis suggested using the audience members as ingredients. Johnstone gave the cooking stations eyes, and that was Tim Schafer's cue to also give them personalities.
I'm all fired up and ready to go.
Yeah, anytime you put eyeballs on anything, Tim will write a line for it, or multiple lines, so that's just something that I've learned over the years.
The end result was an amalgamation that Johnstone and Siddiqui said managed to be both more colourful and thematically darker than the original toy box design, and captured the Psychonauts essence more effectively.
I think Iron Chef is sort of like what you would expect of that environment, and doing it this way, and having disgusting things happen in a really cozy, beautiful environment, just felt more psychonautical in the end.
Reveal the meal!
Building Compton's Cookoff as a cooking show helped resolve another issue facing the team. Both the original toy box stage they were envisioning and The Gods Must Be Hungry were just too big.
The initial impulse anytime you start a level, especially in Psychonauts 2, is to make like a huge, gigantic, expansive world where everything is defined by the central theme. And every version of that just felt too large every single time we played through it, so as the level developed, we just kept shrinking it and shrinking the footprint.
Crucially, cooking games only work when players can see everything they need at once and can easily keep track of important areas and developments. And implementing that design philosophy to a 3D environment created a multifaceted challenge. Some of it stemmed from ensuring the player has the information they need at all times, but the other part was, well, this was Psychonauts.
With The Gods Must Be Hungry, the original prototype, that was something that worked well there because that could have been the basis for an entire game, right? You would have slowly learned one lesson after the other from one level to the next. But with this, in Psychonauts, we're kind of throwing the entire concept at you in one go, and you're never going to see it again. So it's kind of striking this balance between like simplicity and complexity, where it's just like, we don't want the level to feel basic, but we also don't want it to feel so overwhelming that you have to constantly retain all of this information about where everything is.
There was also the Raz issue to contend with. Raz's high level of mobility clashed with the limited size of Compton's Cookoff, so the team doubled down on creating and positioning obstacles that the hero couldn't just clear in a single jump. Where other brain levels have ledges, gaps and more traditional obstacles, Compton's Cookoff ended up with food processor bridges, blades sticking out of rope ladders, paths that double as superheated oven eyes, and a number of other unorthodox challenges for Raz to overcome. The experience grew more intense each time the stage shrank, and, on reflection, Siddiqui believes it was the best choice they could have made.
If I think back to some of the older versions, it kind of felt like you were in a toy box city. That would be totally overwhelming, I would think, and people would probably lose all sense of where they were, and it would probably be like, you know, not that we would make it boring necessarily, but there would be a lot of negative space traveling back and forth between those like far apart destinations. So I'm actually really glad we pulled everything in because it allowed us to like keep the level play like as a single serving experience, right? That would be playable for anyone who was picking this game up.
Still, it didn't mean the challenges were over. The goal was for each world in Psychonauts 2 to feel unique, but with shared elements to create a sense of cohesion throughout the game. Mental connections, for example, were challenging to implement in a way that added meaning, but the solution was, once again, size. Where mental connections helped Raz solve puzzles and triumph over the final boss in Hollis's stage, in Compton's Cookoff, they function as shortcuts between stations and ways to reach out-of-the-way collectibles, often increasing the stage's sense of danger in the process. The team also spent a substantial amount of time building portions of Compton's Cookoff around a power unique to Compton called Brainstorm, which ended up being altered several times later in the production cycle.
The concept for Brainstorm initially was that, Compton was so out of control and so unable to really focus his power that he would have these momentary freakouts, and it would create like a literal storm cloud above him that would zap things in the world and then randomly change them into other things, right? There was like a version where you had to like use Brainstorm to transform certain things, and then sort of like the Mario powers in Mario 3, like they would start blinking into different objects, and then you would have to actually like punch it or interact with it in some way when it was on the desired ingredient, and then you would grab it and go run with it. And then it became a thing where like you'd just be running around and like a roaming cloud would zap whatever you were holding and then ruin it or turn it into something useless.
In the end, the design team cut Brainstorm entirely, which meant having to replan item and station locations, not just in Compton's Cookoff, but across the entire game.
This happens all the time. Like it was like every single level. It wasn't this level in particular. So we were always trying to like all move together, the ship moving all together at once, and everyone had to be kind of on board at the same time. So if there is these changes like, oh, the Brainstorm is not working here, it's not working in this part of the level over here, so of course we have to change it over here, and then we'd have to readjust. It's the wonders of game development and all the little choices that happen along the way.
I've got the situation under control.
One of Compton's Cookoff's most distinct features was a lucky accident. In keeping with Compton's anxieties and the game show theme, Compton and Raz must complete the judges' tasks within a set amount of time.
Finish your dish before the clock runs out, and you'll win valuable prizes from the Mystery Box.
The timer itself is the incentive, as there's never any indication of what may happen to you if you fail, though it wasn't originally planned that way.
30 seconds to go.
The first goal was to actually punish players for failing and force them to redo the round again. But Siddiqui and the team realised the idea of restarting and trying again wasn't a good fit for Psychonauts. So they tried a version where players would miss a special item if they failed the round, though they could always replay the stage after finishing the game. That too was scrapped, and the game shipped with a punishmentless timer, though Siddiqui is pleased that it turned out that way.
One accidental thing that kind of happened there that is really beautiful is that it does kind of tie into like Compton's whole mental state. We're basically like creating this framework where, if I don't do it this way or if I don't do it in this amount of time, I'm a failure, right? But really, like, that's not true. A lot of that is in our heads and is imposed by, external elements. So what ended up happening was that, like, yeah, you failed, but really, like, you were just stressing yourself out for no reason. You don't actually have to do this. Like, life doesn't have to be this way.
Compton's Cookoff is Psychonauts 2 in miniature form. Its show floor is a thoughtfully designed platforming playground whose challenges require and reward careful use of every ability available to you. In resisting the temptation to sprawl, Compton's Cookoff becomes a more concentrated scenario that blends genres and styles while underscoring Compton's deep-seated anxiety. The nature of Psychonauts means you won't walk away from the stage with a better grasp of how to use Raz's abilities, as the next level throws a completely different set of challenges at you. Instead, you leave with something to think about.
Well, I don't know about you, but I've certainly had my fill of excitement today. Alright everybody, let's clean up this mess.
Thank you for watching this episode of Art of the Level. For more developer insights and critical analysis of some of the best levels in gaming history, be sure to watch our breakdowns of Elden Ring and Sifu.